press record now. It is being recorded. So today we are welcoming Robert J. Lake all the way from BC. So he's been very kind to get up early to present for us today, to present the talk, A Front Seat Among the Playgrounds of Two Nations, Lawn Tennis in Niagara-on-the-Lake circa 1880s to 1920s. Robert is in the Sport Science Department at Douglas College, BC, where his research focuses on the socio-historical aspects of tennis. He is a multi-published author, winning the Lord Aberdare Literary Prize from the British Society of Sports History for a social history of tennis in Britain. Among other positions he holds is president-elect for the North American Society for the Sociology of Sport. I will be monitoring the question and answer and chat boxes at the bottom of your window. If you have any questions or comments for Robert, please type them in the Q&A and I will field them to him at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn it over to you, Robert.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. And I see some familiar faces from the UK. So hello to you guys. Good afternoon. And hello to my dad and my sister. I can see it in the participants. Good to have you guys here. It's awesome. Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay, hold on a second. Let me just click some buttons here. Okay, well, I'd like to start by saying thank you. This is honestly a huge honor for me. I don't really like online presentations. I much prefer the in-person. It's much more sort of warm and welcoming and fun. But you know, when I was asked by Rosemary to come and give a talk, I just absolutely couldn't say no. It was an absolute honor and a privilege for me. Rosemary and I guess it was 5 years ago now, Rosemary, I think you emailed me and said, you introduced yourself and said you found a copy of my book and you were like, wanted to make an acquaintance, and you introduced me to Teddy as well. So Teddy Sikowski. I actually had a wonderful chance to meet Teddy about 3 years ago when I was down in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and we had a bit of a tour of the area, and he showed me the tennis courts. And of course, I've been to Niagara-on-the-Lake before because I spent some time in Ontario a few years ago living here. But it was wonderful to kind of see from his perspective, because he's done so much research on this, to get a sense of his perspective on just how everything was set up, and kind of really putting yourself back in time to imagine how life would have been like during the tennis tournaments there in the summer. So that was a real privilege for me. And when I actually started beginning to research this area, which was about 2 years ago, I had to reach out to both Teddy and Rosemary for assistance in various regards, with photographs, with reviewing and editing. And so I can't thank you enough for the help you gave me in that. And I was able to publish some aspects of this paper, or in this presentation, in a paper in the Journal of Urban History earlier this year. So that's a real privilege for me. So thank you both for that. And also Amy and Barbara as well. Just kind of all the nuts and bolts of this presentation, getting us all sorted and putting this together, all the marketing, communications, video hosting, all that kind of stuff. It's not easy, and we've all had to upskill ourselves during this pandemic. So I really appreciate the effort you guys have put into all this. You guys can see my screen, right? Just to clarify. Thumbs up. Okay, good. So in the 4 decades straddling the turn of the 19th century, the small Ontario town of Niagara-on-the-Lake experienced market growth in its tourism industry. Catering predominantly to wealthy upper middle class Canadian and American visitors, the lakeside settlement offered numerous opportunities for polite recreation. Chief among them was lawn tennis, a sport that sat somewhat outside of the mainstream in terms of its high class, mixed sex participation demographic. While its players were imbued with a strong amateur philosophy, local boosters recognized the sport's potential to generate tourism income through its 2 tournaments. But this hinged on the outward presentation among its players and guests of refined gentility, a reflection of both class and gender norms of the time, both on and off the court. In this presentation, I will consider how lawn tennis tournaments fit into the town's burgeoning tourism industry, examine significant historically relevant features of these tournaments, and position the tennis events in Niagara-on-the-Lake in the context of the broader social historical development of tennis in Canada, in order to assess their overall significance. Again, I must thank Teddy for providing me with all the pictures you're about to see. They really were wonderful to view. Except for last year, of course, and possibly also this one, we'll see what happens. Approximately 3.5 million tourists descend each year upon the small Ontario town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Situated on the southern side of Lake Ontario at the mouth of the Niagara River, in case you don't know where this place is, and 12 miles downstream from Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake was once the capital of Upper Canada from 1792 to 1796, and a site of significant historical importance during the War of 1812. Fort George within the town was the Central Division headquarters of the British Army stationed in Upper Canada. Likely unbeknownst to most contemporary tourists, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the town also hosted the two most important lawn tennis tournaments in Canada and was one of the sport's chief cultural epicenters during its incipient growth. The tournaments became key focal points around which the town's summer festivities revolved. The Niagara International was staged on the lawns of the prestigious Queen's Royal Hotel. You see it here in the image. From 1885 and 1923, usually in late August, early September, immediately following the US National Championships, what we now call the US Open, and featured many of North America's leading players. From 1895 to 1911, Niagara-on-the-Lake also hosted the Canadian National Championships. While the tennis tournaments enhanced the town's prosperity, they also played an important role in the sport's early growth. Indeed, today, the Canadian National Championships is better known as the National Bank Open. Actually, it's probably better known as the Rogers Cup because it's only just recently changed its name. One of the ATP Masters and WTA Premier tournaments and staged annually concurrently in Toronto and Montreal. The town and its tennis tournaments thrived during this period as an outcome of a combination of various social, cultural, economic, and geographical/climatic conditions. The history of Niagara-on-the-Lake as a former seat of colonial power ensured it remained well populated with Toronto society throughout the 19th century. Its climate was significantly cooler than in Toronto, thus wealthy residents from the booming metropolis found in Niagara-on-the-Lake an enclave that was not only fashionable in a social sense, but eminently livable during the summer months, where they could partake in numerous outdoor activities, not limited to golf, bass fishing, boating, yachting, bathing, lawn bowling, and of course lawn tennis, away from the unbearable heat and humidity of Toronto, and chiefly, though certainly not entirely, among their own kind. The headquarters for brilliant functions and the rendezvous of society was the Queen's Royal Hotel, founded in 1868, which was owned and run by Henry Winnett, proprietor of Toronto's premier establishment at the time, the Queen's Hotel. Accommodating up to 350 people, it put on numerous entertainments for guests, including some of Upper Canada's most important families, alongside wealthy Americans from across the US. The Duke of York, who later became, of course, King George V, even stayed there in 1901. Such was the town's national distinction. The Globe referred to it as the Newport of Canada, likening the numerous attractions, haute bourgeois clientele, and the milder climatic conditions of Niagara-on-the-Lake with the Rhode Island seat of WASP, old money, wealth, and conspicuous consumption. While lawn tennis was just one of several leisure activities available for Niagara-on-the-Lake guests, the Tennis Week, which referred principally to the week of the Niagara International, took place during the summer's peak tourist period, so was accorded perhaps the greatest importance. For much of its existence, it was sandwiched between three other society events: a lawn bowling tournament, a golf tournament, and a bicycle gymkhana. However, given the status of the visiting guests, the media attention accorded to it, and its longevity, the tennis tournament was arguably the highest profile of them all. Equally, the Canadian National Championships, stayed in Niagara-on-the-Lake, also generated considerable local and North American interest, and became a key site for the best Canadian players, male and female, to test themselves against the standard-bearing American cracks. Excuse me. Since the 1920s, Torontonians had been founding urban sports clubs that were private and exclusive as locations for socializing with those of a similar background. The members of such clubs, as historian Anne Hall noted, were typically gentlemen, men is in italics, gentlemen, white, relatively wealthy, probably Tory in political affiliation, and associated with the ruling family compact a small group of men linked by family, patronage, and shared political and social beliefs to the professional and mercantile upper middle class. Until the mid to late 19th century, women were often excluded and received little support to form their own institutions. As such, these clubs remained sites of male bonding. Due to the gradual but pronounced insurgence throughout the 19th century of the middle classes into the social, cultural, political, and economic spheres that had once been dominated by the aristocratic elite in Canada, the latter experienced a decline in influence. There was a shift in what defined the elite class, which expanded to accommodate the burgeoning wealthy professional upper middle class, comprising white-collar business owners and entrepreneurs. According to historian Keith Walden, the blurring of upper and middle class distinctions within this new hybrid elite and the concomitant bourgeois mimeticism that featured alongside it brought confusion and anxiety, and an urgent need to create comprehensible markers of status. Social distinctions became more subtle. Material wealth was no longer solely an aristocratic privilege, and exercised increasingly through deportment, fashions, and sophisticated cultural tastes. Private clubs for cricket, long bowling, and fox hunting initially served this purpose, requiring members to develop a certain skill set and adhere to a strict code of behavioral etiquette, though it was becoming increasingly evident that the sporting cultures that supported the authority of the colonial elite were being destabilized. As Canadian sport historian Alan Metcalf explained, by 1867, the residual notions of colonial British North America were challenged by the emergent ones of an increasingly industrialized Canada. In the case of sport, the victors won the opportunity to establish hegemonic control of future sport development, and colonial notions lost out. The older pursuits declined in popularity, but were soon replaced as sports for the new ruling class with sports like curling, golf, and lawn tennis, which retained elements of British elite culture, but were accessible to members of the burgeoning professional upper middle class. In lawn tennis, the former almost always remained the cultural reference group, even though their participation within lawn tennis dwindled by the 1890s. They retained influence as club patrons and often invited to open tournament proceedings and present trophies, the proverbial cutting of the ribbon. Within Canada, Ontario became the epicenter for lawn tennis development before the turn of the century. Between 1876 and 1900, at least 9 clubs had been formed in Toronto alone. Granite, Park, St. Matthews, Toronto, Ossington, Victoria College, Varsity, which was University of Toronto, Rosedale, and Osgoode Hall. At least 19 other clubs in Ontario were formed during this period as well, in the cities of London, St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, Bradford, Sutton, Thorold, Pembroke, Uxbridge, Kingston, Barrie, Brantford, Galt, Hamilton, Peterborough, Petrolia, Meryton, 2 in Ottawa and Parliament, and of course, Niagara-on-the-Lake. In their enthusiasm for lawn tennis, the young men and women of this new hybrid elite class demonstrated their preference for participation within a broader socio-cultural context, demanding refined gentility. For them it was, to coin the historian Philip McIntosh, an expression of urban civility. These elements were abundant in Niagara-on-the-Lake around the turn of the century. While Niagara-on-the-Lake had always been blessed with a pleasant scenery and summer climate, its embrace of tourism as a key industry in the late 19th century was less a matter of choice than necessity. The decades prior represented a period of uncertainty for the town's residents, as a series of setbacks had converged to threaten its local economy. Notably, the opening of the Welland Canal in 1829 and its subsequent expansions in 1854 and 1887, which diverted commerce away from the area. The closure of the Harbour and Dock Company in 1864, which reduced cross-lake employment and traffic. The withdrawal of the British garrison in 1870, and the relocation of county government to St. Catharines around the time it was incorporated as a city in 1876. The town's small-scale industrial production consisted of saw and grist mills, basket and canning factories, and shipyards. But poor railway accessibility meant that receiving raw materials and shipping goods remained relatively expensive. During this period, some notable improvements were made in the local transportation networks that connected Niagara-on-the-Lake with larger urban centers nearby, but while the town was made more accessible, it simply could not compete on an industrial or manufacturing scale with the likes of Toronto, Hamilton, and Buffalo. In response, Local residents, business owners, entrepreneurs, and councillors began to push for investments to develop and exploit tourism as the most viable industry moving forward. Especially from the 1890s onward, correspondents in local newspapers repeatedly promoted Niagara-on-the-Lake as, according to historian Cecilia Morgan, a sleeping beauty to be awakened by increased improvements and more visitors. In time, upper middle class Torontonians came to regard Niagara-on-the-Lake as an extension of their city, where among cooler summertime temperatures, they could practice their bourgeois proclivities away from the plague of nuisances, as Mackintosh called them, drunks, peddlers, rowdy boys, noisy music makers, that apparently constituted Toronto's working class community. This is not to say that working class people did not also frequent the town. The 75-cent economy class steamship fare from Toronto ensured a healthy, diverse mix of visitors, but arguably it was the wealthiest patrons that exerted the most influence upon the town's emerging tourism culture. And while the Canadian contingent was significant, it was the influx of wealthy Americans that had the most important impact. Indeed, it was often the pressure from American summer homeowners, or rather the potential threat of their withdrawal, that prompted action from the local council to legislate for and invest in infrastructural improvements in the town. We have conversed with gentlemen who are in the habit of coming here every summer, owning fine residences, and spend thousands of dollars in town annually, and they express regret that the council takes such little interest in the town's welfare, lamented an anonymous Niagara-on-the-Lake citizen in the Times in 1896. Lest the council show moral courage to take decisive action on issues, such as, for example, the destruction of property caused by roaming horses and cattle, Niagara-on-the-Lake's popularity as a summer resort will be a thing of the past. With civic boosterism in mind, newspapers extolled the town's virtues as a summer haven for higher class guests and reminded local residents to clean up their properties and welcome tourists. Brochures served a similar purpose. Published in 1897 by the Niagara District Board of Trade, one of them described in some detail the town's ease of access, beauty of scenery, historic interest, and its wealth of attractions and health-giving qualities. It stated that social events at the Queen's Royal Hotel, especially the Saturday hops, bring together the cream of society from Toronto, Hamilton, St. Catharines, Buffalo, and Rochester. Another brochure, self-published by the local resident John Clark, exclaimed, "Can one imagine a pleasure more ideal to spend a hot summer's day than lolling under an immense shade tree on a rolling piece of land, covered by beautiful green lawn and 3/4 surrounded by water, having a view on one side of gorgeous Lake Ontario and the other the most beautiful and renowned Niagara River, with all sorts of sailing craft passing to and fro, and not a minute of the 24 hours daily without a cool breeze. Such a place is Niagara-on-the-Lake." What an idyllic description of the town. Attesting to their apparent importance to the image and prosperity of the town, taking up more than half of the entire brochure, Clark also included half-page photographs of 18 different summer houses owned by residents outside of Niagara-on-the-Lake. You can see a handful of them here. And you might be able to recognize some of them because a lot of these houses are still around. Their places of residence included Toronto, alongside cities in the states of New York, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Louisiana. Their professions ranged from manufacturing, lumber, railroad, and distilling to banking, publishing, and law, all solidly middle class. The Niagara International was given particular attention in these publications, and the description of the unusual gaiety found during the event, the tournament balls, dances, boating parties, and entertainments that make the evening hours slip by on the golden wings of pleasure, reaffirmed the town's high class and mixed gender target audience. From these publications alone, it was apparent that wealthy, upper middle class ladies and gentlemen represented the key demographic toward which the town's leisure, activities, and excursions were aimed. The Queen's Royal Hotel not only afforded its guests premier accommodation, facilities, and catering, but also capitalized on the mixed gender participation that this class increasingly enjoyed in its leisure activities. While ladies still tended to remain more private, the recreations afforded by the hotel and throughout the town most often were conducted within relatively secluded spaces. Refined individual sporting activities that afforded mixed participation were much preferred over more competitive, what you might call now manly, team games, or what's called at the time, manly team games, such as ice hockey, lacrosse, baseball, and Canadian football, that had stronger lower middle class or working class participation, and were better established in urban areas with a larger and more ethnically diverse population. As a focal point for the Niagara International, the Queen's Royal converted their vast back lawn into grass courts, which were, according to the Youngstown News, unequaled anywhere else in North America. This is probably an exaggeration, but certainly this was what they believed. Reports intimated that the social accoutrement, rather than the actual tennis, were what brought a healthy repeat custom year upon year. We go there ostensibly to play tennis. But tennis is an ingredient, not an essence, remarked the editor of Wright and Ditson's Lawn Tennis Guide in 1899 when describing the town. 8 years later, the editor reiterated, the tennis tournaments at Niagara are a signal for a good time. Upon their commencement, everyone starts in and no time is lost. Sounds like a right hoot, doesn't it? For the mid-1890s, many of the leading American players, both male and female, regularly made Niagara-on-the-Lake part of their annual summer tour. By this time, assisted by the US and Canadian National Lawn Tennis Associations, many tournament committees organized their events in succession, so players and spectators could travel to one after the other. After the Canadian Championships, typically staged in July, the focus was always the US Championships in mid to late August in Newport from 1881 to 1915. The Niagara International typically came immediately afterwards, which meant that instead of it being a serious warm-up event for North America's most important championship, it was a more relaxed occasion, to be enjoyed rather than vigorously contested. Indeed, the importance of its position within the tournament calendar and the presence of American cracks was revealed in 1897 when, due to rainy weather in Newport that caused matches there to be postponed, the Niagara-on-the-Lake Committee decided to delay the commencement of its own tournament. American players were considered the standard bearers of performance across the continent, especially those from Ivy League schools in the Northeast, typically Harvard and Yale. Tournaments throughout Ontario not only celebrated their presence, but also relied upon them to attract spectators and add excitement along mildly competitive patriotic lines. Regarding the 1894 Canadian National Championships, at this point staged in Ottawa, a correspondent remarked that American entries are always much appreciated, but a good many expressions of disappointment were voiced when not one American player entered the main singles draw to contest the reigning champion. Thus, it was decided that Niagara-on-the-Lake would in future prove a more suitable host. Indeed, just 8 weeks later, by contrast, the town enjoyed the most expert and numerous gathering of tennis players hitherto seen on Canadian courts at the 1894 Niagara International. The large contingent of American cracks were supported by a throng of spectators for the men's final, apparently the largest gathering ever seen at a tennis match in Canada. They brought great enthusiasm to the occasion. Undoubtedly, the impressive attendance of 600 guests that was numbered for the previous year's tournament closing dance was likely far surpassed by the 1894 event. As the years progressed, the tennis culture at Niagara-on-the-Lake blossomed, and at least until the Great War, the player list for the International included, apparently, anyone of any significance in the North American tennis world, according to Canadian tennis historian Martin Hendrick. Given its position toward the end of the season, the Niagara International was always a popular tournament, being the last good one of the year. It brings together many of the best players as a winding up of the season's outing. To round out its program of men's and women's singles and doubles events, the hosts also put on a men's handicap singles and a mixed doubles event. These were understood as consolation events and never intended to tempt overly competitive play. Their inclusion in the tournament program helped to lend the entire occasion an appearance of relaxed, casual play that was unequivocally amateur in spirit and held up as idyllic, at least aesthetically. This had an impact on the forms of masculinity and femininity performed at the town's tennis events, which were reflective of broader class norms and behavioral expectations. Excuse me, sorry. At a time when Canadian officials representing lacrosse, baseball, ice hockey, and Canadian football were most concerned with the commercialization of these sports and the concomitant practices of what became known as sham amateurism or shamateurism, notably under-the-table payments, dubious job offers, and illegal transfer bonuses to players. Professionalism was considered anathema to sport's true ideals. In response, the Amateur Athletic Association of Canada, the AAAC, urged officials across all sports to create an amateur definition and enforce strict sanctions against the twin processes of the commercialization and professionalization of sport. Aligning itself with the AAAC, the Canadian Lawn Tennis Association, the CLTA, upon its formation in 1890, defined an amateur as one who has never played or taught any sport as one of its ordinary means of livelihoods or in connection therewith. Interestingly, you'll note that it says his, and this gender dynamic I'll come back to in a second. Exponents of the sport across North America, however, regarded lawn tennis as above such malfeasance, and so likely proposed an amateur definition merely as a precautionary measure. Indeed, within the tennis, the strictures of amateurism were such that even the practice of what became known as pot hunting, players essentially choosing what tournaments to enter based simply on the value of their prizes, was widely condemned. Interestingly, while American influences were frequently identified as the key factor in the spread of professionalism into these sports, or into other sports, in lawn tennis, the staunchly amateur United States National Lawn Tennis Association actually influenced Canadian lawn tennis in the opposite direction. Writing in 1891, the US NLTA Executive Committee member Howard A. Taylor wrote of tennis as free from the inroads of the professional athlete, celebrating the game's nice parentage, having been nurtured in England under the influences and ideas and people where sports have not been played for business, but for pleasure. The US NLTA President Joseph S. Clark, he's pictured here, was equally unequivocal in his praise, arguing that lawn tennis is recognized and patronized by the best class of people in every community, and is one of the cleanest, most honest, and best of our outdoor games. With a few exceptions, lawn tennis players were considered a special class of gentlemen, unmotivated by financial gain. Historian Kevin Jones identified 17 sports in Canada that had professional athletes in their ranks by the year 1900, but lawn tennis was not one of them. 4 years later, tennis writer J. Parmley Paré reaffirmed the sport's special, incontrovertible amateur status when he described its players as men of comparative refinement, and reassured there are no professionals, for there is no money-making side to the sport. Most of the regular tournament players are collegians or men of leisure. Evidently for Paré, again, women were not true players of the sport. They were men of leisure, not people of leisure. And as such, were not included in debates about amateurism, which speaks, I think, as much to the sexism endemic to sport in general at this time, as to the superior moral standing assumed of women at that time. More on that later. The strength of the amateur ideology held intrinsic value for all who were connected to lawn tennis in Canada, as it elevated them above those of other more corruptible sports. However, beyond personal ethics, there were vested interests at play. Simply put, if lawn tennis maintained an image of respectability and gentility, wealthy and socially aspirational tourists would be attracted to the sport and the establishments and towns connected to it. From this perspective, it is apparent why the lawn tennis events were accorded special significance within Niagara-on-the-Lake. Their atmosphere, where the off-court festivities at times seemed to take precedence over the on-court play, perfectly complemented the celebrated amateur ideals for which tennis reportedly stood. Yet, despite the relaxed atmosphere within the grounds of the Queen's Royal Hotel during the Niagara-on-the-Lake tennis tournaments, behind the scenes and prior to the events, the tournament organizers and local business and hotel owners were strategic in their efforts to attract tourists. In this regard, the sport figured centrally in numerous textual and visual advertisements for the town. Special rates were offered to competing players, obtained from the railroads and steamboat lines and from the Queen's Royal Hotel, which also advertised a $5 package, good for steamboat fare and board at a hotel from Saturday to Monday. The town's other main hotels, the Riverside, Oban, and Chautauqua, this is the Oban pictured here in the middle at the bottom, offered alternative accommodations that were apparently designed to appeal to a broader, somewhat less well-off group of tourists. While social exclusivity was desired, local businesses first had to be profitable, and this meant catering to less well-off tourists at times. Working class people certainly would have enjoyed many of the town's attractions, including walks, picnicking, hiring bicycles. And while there were no comprehensive records of who frequented the lawn tennis tournaments as spectators, it is highly likely that some of them would have been working class. From 1895 onwards, when the town enjoyed hosting both the Canadian National Championships and the Niagara International, organizers made sure to capitalize. Their calculated strategy, I love this, was revealed in 1899. The bold policy of announcing weeks before the Canadian Lawn Tennis Championships event in every newspaper from Baffin's Bay to Patagonia that everyone or everybody who was anybody would be on hand for sure at the biggest tennis tournament on earth had its effect at last. And it got to be so that the shower bouquet of stars were scared to stay away. Then when the public began to scratch its head and think for itself, it was too late. The toboggan had started and Niagara-on-the-Lake had asserted its right to a front seat among the playgrounds of two nations. Aside from the weather, almost nothing was left to chance. The commodity value of the players, especially the traveling American stars we call cracks, and their entourage of supporters was dutifully recognized. And the facade of amateurism cleverly hid the reality of creeping commercialism. Cecilia Morgan remarked, "It was no secret that hotel keepers and local boosters hoped that Americans would constitute a significant part of their clientele. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to welcome the Americans. At the very least, they were encouraged to behave as though they did." The importance of American tourist dollars to the town's prosperity was duly noted in 1900. "This year, we have been favored with a large number of tourists, principally from the southern and northern states, and we urge an intelligent effort not only to retain but largely increase this business. We agree our summer business is our most valued and paying one." And this came from the Times. Despite the growing capitalist impulses surrounding the tennis events, organizers continued to celebrate the sport's amateur ideals, which were worth protecting to sustain this lucrative industry. The lawn tennis events had become evidently part of an elaborate business plan for the town, and only the sight of summer gaiety, the ladies and gentlemen in their fine frocks, lying listlessly on a hammock or stretching oneself out on the grassy slopes and dreaming away the hours, masked this underlying emphasis. Far from innocuous, therefore, the gender and class ideals that were expressed behaviorally actually played an important role in promoting the sport's genteel and amateur image, which was certainly exaggerated, but held value for the tournament hosts and local businesses. With regard to the blossoming tennis tourism in Niagara-on-the-Lake, the actions of especially bourgeois women in particular helped to enhance the spectacle of lawn tennis, reaffirm its amateur pretensions, and assuage public fears of the encroachment of professionalism upon it. In general, argued Canadian sport historian Colin Howell, the presence of women as sport spectators at this time was thought to purify the moral atmosphere, inspire men to behave respectably, and restrain the unregulated passions that might otherwise be released. Within the tennis community, the expectation among bourgeois ladies to be both proprietors of morality and ornaments of beauty were voiced frequently. In an article in Wright and Ditson's entitled "The Charm Women Bring to Tennis," the correspondent lady writer suggested, I love this, "They are graceful and gentle. They have spirit and enthusiasm. And in tennis, as in other things, they stimulate man to do his best. How they thank you with a look. How they rejoice with you. How they comfort you. How often they outdo expectation. And how pretty they are. It would be a bad day for lawn tennis were it to discard the feminine element. Professionalism would follow, and then goodbye to it." This interesting connection between the presence of women and the threat of professionalism speaks to the nuanced intersections of class and gender relations in tennis at this time. These were seen in abundance at the Niagara-on-the-Lake events, where guests conspicuously displayed their wealth and status. Social geographer and historian Peter Goheen described the practices associated with parading among the upper middle classes in Toronto that in the mid to late 19th century would have demanded of young women a type of performance reminiscent of the promenading ladies of the London season. This practice gradually declined in Canada, but was replaced with less ostentatious affairs, as opportunities opened up for new social rituals for the young, wealthy women who were part of Canada's ruling class. Arguably, their participation in the activities associated with Tennis Week in Niagara-on-the-Lake as players, spectators, or casual guests could be seen as a manifestation of shifting expectations in this regard. Those attending were expected to perform according to norms related both to their gender and their class simultaneously. For McIntosh, the flaunting of fashion, reputation, and wealth, and the cotillions, concerts, music that accompany the annual international tennis tournament denotes the presence of a bourgeois purpose grander than mere athleticism. Rather, the athletic events and their attendant society at Niagara-on-the-Lake came to signify all that was spatially and socially proper and refined. The social activities and festivities staged during Tennis Week demanded the presence of ladies dressed in the height of late Victorian fashion, as you can see in this image, and were examples of what Lane and Murphy called obligated leisure for the wealthy. That is, heavily regulated social obligations, necessitating all participants to favorably represent their families and conspicuously display their wealth, status, and class. In the absence of good manners, God forbid, a young lady might suffer the indignation of exclusion among her peers and also, perhaps, lose the most important battle, which was to win a desirable spouse. By the 1890s, the social events at Niagara-on-the-Lake and the women in them had become decidedly public, as women were seen increasingly outside of the home and or away from purely domestic responsibility. The lawn tennis events helped bridge this gap. The various private aspects of tennis culture, the secluded courts, exclusive rather than mass audiences, and private parties and events, blended with the more visible appearance of women as arbiters of morality and good taste, and as ornaments of beauty, civility, and gentility, and of course also as athletic specimen. That said, young women remained largely innocuous figures across a cultural landscape that continued to valorize masculine power and celebrate male dominance. Both of these processes worked in tandem. For the wealthy visitors of Niagara-on-the-Lake, tennis was considered evidently relatively safe for their daughters to follow or play, where they could mix socially with gentlemen of similar class backgrounds in the context of relaxed amateur sporting competition. The tradition of 5 o'clock tea on the veranda of Queen's Royal was well known, but for those seeking a more secluded setting, the hotel grounds contain numerous groves, flower gardens, and wooded walks, including the infamous Lover's Lane beside the river. Who knows what happened there? Which afforded young and unmarried ladies and gentlemen occasions for courtship. The tennis tournaments provided extended opportunities to gaze upon the lithe bodies and refined movements of athletic young men and women. By all accounts, flirtatious encounters were de rigueur within the Niagara-on-the-Lake tournaments. For tennis writer J. Parnley Paré, tomfoolery and dark deeds were commonly associated with its social events. Rumors, dialogue, and such topical matter were regularly featured in the tournament's daily newspaper, The Lark, which apparently chronicled all manner of occurrences, however trivial. This included subtle references to the romantic exploits of popular male players, such as the millionaire summer girl crusher, Dwight Davis, taking evening strolls in the shrubberies with notable ladies. Young women were often represented in published discourse, always, of course, through a heteronormative lens, as prized companions for the elite male players. Much disappointment was voiced in 1896 when the heartthrob Arthur Foote, here he is in the middle, a Yale graduate, was absent. This was subject to much comment, there being a row of shirt-waisted summer girls on the terrace like a lot of Rachels, weeping and would not be comforted. Likewise, Davis's Harvard teammate, here he is, Malcolm Whitman on the bottom right here, brought forth the most intense approval from the feminine section of the dress circle for his life-active figure and delirium tremens service. These young men were the late Victorian equivalents of Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, if not for their play, then at least for their apparent sex appeal. Tennis play and off-court displays of wealth and public dialogue of the romantic exploits were avenues for these young men to display masculine prowess. Administratively, if not also on court, lawn tennis remained a sport dominated by men. Though by the 1890s, it was apparent that the performances of women were beginning to have a lasting impact upon general attitudes toward their physical abilities. In 1891, the editor of Right and Distance claimed that lawn tennis has done more to develop among girls a taste for outdoor sports than have all other exercises combined. The old-fashioned idea that a girl, to be ladylike, must not run or walk rapidly is fast disappearing. Changes in these regards, however, were slow and never comprehensive. Descriptions of women's play in tournament reports, and there were many of them, such as those at Niagara-on-the-Lake, commanded far less space for those than those for men, provided less detail, and always came after the report of men's play. They were also sometimes condescending, what we would now call sexist. Lottie Dodd, the well-known English player, was commended in Right and Distance in 1891 for being healthy, ruddy, and as strong as a man. The editor then sought to assuage any concerns. With all her training, don't worry, she has not lost a particle of her womanliness. Casual comments such as this reinforce the notion that men naturally and without question set the standards of performance, and that by implication, female players were somewhat stepping outside of their natural domain when they competed. Equally patronizing, sorry, my camera's falling off here. There we go. Equally patronizing was the exhibition of tennis described at the Niagara International Ladies Singles Final in 1893, which was apparently very fine, though the editor adopted a tone of surprise when noting, in some rallies, more especially one at the close of the first net, there must have been at least a dozen returns of difficult strokes by each player. One of the most dominant female players in Niagara-on-the-Lake was Juliet Atkinson from Brooklyn. Here she is pictured. Her first triumph in the 1896 Canadian Championships over the defending champion Mrs. Sidney Smith invited the suggestion that Atkinson was playing well enough that day to beat most men. The strongest test for Atkinson came from a fellow New Yorker, Elizabeth, or better known as Bessie, Moore, who bested her at the US National Championships just 2 months later. Much was expected of their anticipated meeting at the 1897 Canadian Championships, but Moore's absence from Niagara-on-the-Lake brought general regret, as a contest between these two young ladies is of more interest to the average spectator than a dozen battles between men, however well they may play. Occasional hyperbole aside, it was apparent that as the century approached its end, descriptions of women's play remained comparatively brief and sometimes condescending. The exploits of a young Californian helped to transform the dominant narratives about appropriate female athleticism. May Sutton, here she is in the top right-hand corner. This is a photo taken of her at Niagara-on-the-Lake, and here she is playing in the bottom right against a Canadian in 1911. May Sutton made history by becoming the first overseas Wimbledon singles champion in 1905, defeating the English stalwart Dorothy Lambert-Chambers in straight sets. In reporting her victory, Spalding's Lawn Tennis Annual broke with its usual tradition of glossing over the achievements of female players. Over 1 page in length, which was really quite long at the time, the report also featured for the very first time a statistical stroke analysis. Her play, especially from the baseline, was widely commended. Her first appearance at the Niagara International 2 years later was met with great crowds of spectators. Thousands came to see her play, and all were well repaid. She was, by all accounts, the conspicuous figure there. While in claiming her second Wimbledon singles title 2 months earlier, she fairly electrified both the men and women experts on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean by what was termed phenomenal exhibitions. Perhaps the most noteworthy performance involving Sutton in Niagara-on-the-Lake was in 1911, when she met Hazel Hotchkiss. Here she is on the left, sort of in the middle here, next to May Sutton. Who a week earlier had secured her third straight U.S. national championship singles title. These were the two best female players in America at the time. The match, won in 3 sets by Hotchkiss, was described as all and more than had been expected, being spectacular in the extreme. Their meeting completely overshadowed every other feature of the tournament, and the men's events fading into insignificance in comparison. Again, as I mentioned, in the bottom picture, you can see here Sutton playing and the large crowd that followed her in 1911. May Sutton had taken the international tennis world by storm, and her presence at the Niagara International with Hazel Hotchkiss, who, as Hazel Whiteman when she got married, would go on to create the famous Whiteman Cup, represented for many the tournament's crowning moment. For other female players, their achievements set the tone for the marked advances made after the Great War by players like Suzanne Longland and Helen Wills, who would help to transform the landscape of female athletics. Tennis was a vehicle to deliver a more comprehensive reevaluation of women's physical capabilities, and the pre-war tournaments at Niagara-on-the-Lake served as an important precursor to this development. Unfortunately, for Niagara-on-the-Lake and its tennis events, the interwar period brought significant decline. As the Canadian Lawn Tennis Association sought to expand its national championships, the tournament moved to Vancouver in 1912, then back to Toronto for 1913 and 1914. Seeking larger urban areas for the Canadian Championships, the event never returned to Niagara-on-the-Lake. The last Niagara International was held in 1923, a year after the Queen's Royal Hotel was offered up for sale to the Niagara Parks Commission after declining tourist numbers. The hotel's sustained financial difficulties only worsened during the Great Depression, and by 1934, the hotel sat derelict, its furniture and fittings auctioned off, and the town took possession of it in lieu of back taxes. Soon after, it was dismantled and turned into parkland. Unfortunately, I do not have any images of how it looked during this time. In my humble opinion, the town's civic and business leaders in 2021 owe a debt of gratitude to their equivalents who helped develop the lawn tennis events in Niagara-on-the-Lake 140 years earlier. These events, encompassing both the on-court competitions and their associated off-court festivities, played a significant role in supporting the town's tourism industry. Indeed, for 40 years, civic and business leaders in Niagara-on-the-Lake diverted resources toward and focused attention on hosting lawn tennis tournaments to support its tourism industry. They recognized the Canadian Championships and the Niagara International as lucrative events for the town's hotels, restaurants, and other businesses. Steamships and railways that connected with Niagara-on-the-Lake enjoyed significant business via the tourism that these lawn tennis events helped generate. The main drawing card was the strong contingent of American stars who became, in effect, commodities that were sold as attractions to prospective visitors. The injection of American dollars into the town's economy became vital to its success, and arguably still does, as did the presence on and off court of bourgeois ladies and gentlemen, who played equal roles in capitalizing upon the sport as a form of tourism. In the broader context of turn-of-the-century leisure in southern Ontario, lawn tennis at Niagara-on-the-Lake did more than boost local tourism. It also provided another cultural epicenter outside of Toronto for lawn tennis and other recreations fashionable among the upper middle class to thrive. As Canadian and US tennis administrators carefully navigated the troubling waters of sham amateurism, claiming lawn tennis and its players as in effect above the insalubrious transgressions endemic to other sports, the slow but perceptively developing tourism industry generated through lawn tennis in Niagara-on-the-Lake offers an opportunity to critique the sport's supposed amateur purity and anti-commercial stance. As we know only too well, money corrupts. The presence of bourgeois ladies and gentlemen, lolling about the town during tennis week, highlighted a broader discursive purpose of this sporting event, and also helped mask the creeping commercialization of lawn tennis. Social class and gender relations manifested themselves in other important ways too. Gentlemen were strongly conditioned by amateur ideals and expected to perform according to a strict code of etiquette, which forbade all forms of remuneration and demanded fair play, self-restraint, and the exhibition of genteel behavior. In the context of the shifting class dynamics and blurring lines of elite status in post-Confederation Upper Canada, this was significant. Off-court, ladies set the high social tone and demonstrated appropriate femininity as ornaments of beauty and prized companions for elite male players within the tournament's social events. Only with advances in and subsequent growing respect for their on-court play did the broader social expectations of their role within the tennis events in Niagara-on-the-Lake shift and expand. The influence of players like Juliet Atkinson, Mae Sutton, and Hazel Hotchkiss not only helped transform broader expectations of female play during this period, but also helped put, or perhaps keep, the Niagara-on-the-Lake tennis events in the spotlight, as they occasionally bested the men as the tournament's star attractions. As the Canadian National Championships passes its 130th year, a record television audience is anticipated for the 2021 event later on this summer, all being well, when Rafael Nadal and, of course, the Canadian Bianca Andreescu look to defend their singles titles from 2019. There was no event in 2020. It is worth remembering how the Canadian National Championships came of age in Niagara-on-the-Lake, simultaneously providing an important boost for the sport and the town. Female players have also come a long way. The image of the sedentary, corseted young lady on the sidelines has been replaced by the world's most famous, wealthy, and accomplished professional athletes. The sport remains popular among Canadian women who, as of 2018, the most recent results I could find, they represent 44% of the 6.5 million regular tennis players in Canada. Also, and I don't know if any of you knew this, but the two most well-known Canadian female players, Bianca Andreescu and Eugenie Bouchard, with a combined net worth of $10 million as of mid-2020, Andreescu $4 million and Bouchard $6 million, respectively, they represent the highest paid Canadian female athletes across all sports. So while I intended, of course, for this presentation to offer a balanced and objective, as much as we can be objective in history, assessment of the Niagara-on-the-Lake tennis events, I simply cannot help but conclude with a personal note. I must query why it has taken so long for this history to be uncovered. Given the recent and pronounced insurgence of Canadian players at the highest level of professional tennis, the increasing popularity and participation rates of tennis generally during the global pandemic, and anyone who's seen the tennis courts anywhere across Canada will know this to be the case, particularly out in the West here. The tennis courts are full of people at the moment, due to the fact that it is one of the only competitive sports that adheres to social distancing protocols, and the greater historical introspection created, I believe, as an indirect outcome of the pandemic. I see this moment as an opportune one to promote this history as a permanent feature within the town's current tourism strategy. Visitors to Niagara-on-the-Lake today would do well to learn of how significant the sport of lawn tennis was in boosting its tourism industry before the Great War, and how the town and its tennis events featured within the history of tennis and the market advances of female players more broadly. That this tennis history is not publicly celebrated, at least as far as I can see. Not even a simple plaque on a tree down by the waterfront park where the famous lawn of the Queen's Royal Hotel used to stand, and here it is, I've made up a little picture for you, is to my mind inexplicable, baffling, and also an opportunity wasted. So on that note, I do look forward to when I can visit again Niagara-on-the-Lake and see this fascinating and significant tennis history proudly, fittingly, and visibly celebrated as it should be. Thank you very much. And that's all from me.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing your research with us today. So what we'll do is a couple of questions, and we've got Rosemary here as well to help with some of the questions. So let's start with some of the ones we have on here. Actually, I got one through an email. So one question was, what type of tennis rackets were used in this era?
Oh goodness! Oh, you know what? I actually have one. So behind me, you'll notice a few tennis rackets. These are old and they're wooden. They were actually donated to me by the people who run the sports facilities at Douglas College. They were throwing them away, and I was like, no, you can't do that. But they were rackets like this. This is one I found at a charity shop for about £5 in the UK. I mean, the leading manufacturers, I think, were Spalding and a handful of others. They were old, they were wooden, and at the very, very start, lawn tennis rackets were actually rackets made from real tennis and rackets. They only made specialized tennis rackets from around the 1880s. But they were very much like this. I can't show you anything more. I mean, they're made of wood composite. They're pretty weak and brittle. I mean, if I was to try and bend this, I probably could. And the fibers that made the strings certainly weren't the quality that we expect today. But ostensibly, they haven't changed a bit. I mean, I could go outside and hit some forehands with this, and while I might destroy the strings, I get the same effect.
Thank you. The next question comes from Simon Eves. Given Perez's comments on lack of professionalism, which are odd, have you seen any examples of professional coaching as in Ireland, Europe, and the US in the late 19th century?
Thank you, Simon. I'm so glad to see you. Simon's a good friend of mine. Him and I have been, he's the brains, but I'm the brawn behind our tennis collaboration. Simon, great question. I haven't seen a great deal of professionalism. I'm still trawling through, our professional coaches, I'm still trawling through pieces of information, some raw data from clubs. I have reached out to Toronto Lawn Tennis Club and so far not been successful trying to find information. It's a work in progress, Simon. I suspect I probably will find it, but I haven't come across it yet. I mean, it would be surprising not to find at least a little bit of professional coaching among some of the better players. Or maybe a handful of the American players kind of came across and did exhibition events up north. And I know that some professional tours in the 1920s and 30s certainly came into Canada when they were touring. So that's all I know, Simon. I'm afraid I can't give any more information, but certainly if I find it, I'll let you know.
An additional comment or question from Simon is, in your research, did you find any examples of the lark?
There's one copy apparently, and Rosemary and Teddy will know this very well. There's one copy of the lark on display. And I believe Rosemary has been on a mission to ask local residents to trawl their basements and attics to see if they can find alternative copies, other copies. But I don't know if Rosemary, if you want to comment on this particular question about what copies of the lark.
Sarah has one copy.
I was gonna say, wasn't gonna take over the question, but I was like, oh, but we have one. I wanted to see if anyone else did too.
No, it's yours, Sarah.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, that's the only known copy of the lark is at our museum? That can't be right.
Well, I mean, these must exist. I mean, I somewhere in people's attics. I mean, why would you throw away these things? Because you know, they would be memories, wouldn't they? If you attended the tournament, if you were competing, you'd want to keep that and share that with your grandchildren. So I believe it'll be there somewhere, and hopefully one day we can unearth some.
Yes, and the lark, the copy that we have is digitized, and it is up on our online collection. So if anyone is interested in seeing that and aren't able to just find it through our website, they can contact the museum and we can give you the link to where it is online. So the next question, well, it was sort of answered of where in today's Queens Royal Park were the lawn tennis courts, and I think you kind of showed that in your picture, unless anyone, either you or Rosemary, wanted to expand on that at all.
I mean, if you head down the road to the waterfront, you'll see that the grass area is still there. You can still see the sort of fairly large oval, and you can certainly imagine. I mean, when I was there 3 years ago, people were picnicking and throwing a frisbee. It was very quite clear where the courts existed. If you head down to Niagara-on-the-Lake, I don't have any more photographs. I don't know if Rosemary, if you want to add anything, but it's certainly, yeah. it's if you go there, it's quite obvious where the courts were, just by the waterfront.
Yeah, definitely. And Rosemary, do you have any comments at all?
Tatey has done quite a bit of work picking out backgrounds of photographs. He thinks that certainly some of the photographs are set where the parking lot is at the moment, which opens up a lot of possibilities. I'm really delighted to see at least earlier Sherry Flett's name among the attendees today, because we've often dreamed of doing a recreation of some of those tennis images in the park, and Shaw performers like Sherry and the costuming department that they have at the Shaw Festival would be wonderful to draw into an enterprise like that.
Yeah, it's great. Any research that I've done too with this showed, I would say, where the parking lots and the bathrooms are. It was fairly close to the building, just kind of down a hill. You can see in some more images, and some of the images that you had on your screen show it as well. The next one is from Sarah Barnes. Thank you, Robert, for your animated and fun presentation. I was wondering, were you surprised to find so much sex appeal and potentially celebrity around some of the male tennis players you mentioned?
Thank you, Sarah. Great question. Nice to see you. Was I surprised? I don't know. I mean, all the literature around the Victorian era tends to sort of sweep all this sort of stuff under the carpet, right? You know, it's all these sedate pleasures and polite, you know, gentility, and it's all prim and proper. But there must have been, you know, raunchy stuff going on. I mean, it's impossible that it wasn't. You know, but I think it was just simply not discussed. It was an unladylike and ungentlemanly thing to do, to discuss these things. So whenever there was any discussion, it was always hints. It was always kind of suggestive, but never kind of detailed. And so when you hear of Dwight Davis going for walks in the shrubberies with young tennis maidens, you kind of get a sense of what's happening there. There's something going on, and we don't know anything more than that. It's all very sort of tongue-in-cheek. So I don't think I was particularly surprised to see that. But in terms of the celebrity status, I mean, this really did not emerge, this idea of the tennis celebrity, really until the 1920s, with Susan Longlin and Bill Tilden and Helen Wills and some of the other players that became well known. So in the early 1900s and certainly the late 1800s, this is the Victorian Edwardian eras, the tennis celebrity was given the fact that, you know, tennis news didn't spread too quickly, too globally at this time, which tend to be sort of within certain publications you'd read and hear about these things. It was probably a bit more subdued. But certainly locally, I mean, especially if you've been to a tournament once or twice before, you know who the leading players are. There's a sort of kind of excitement around them. And of course, if you're attracted to athletic young male and female bodies, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to imagine what those balls and dances and concerts and après tennis, off-court tennis events were like. They were probably lots of fun, and, you know, a few gin and tonics inside, and then you're off. And I think that's probably what it was like. And I'm trying to use my imagination here as I think about this.
Thanks. Sorry, I've got someone working on our HVAC system here. So the next question is, what would have existed where, does the Canadian Lawn Tennis Association still exist?
Yeah, it's called Tennis Canada. It's called Tennis Canada, yeah. And they're still around. They're based in Toronto. I've had some meetings and dealings with them. Very nice people, very good. They seem to be fairly on the ball with developing at all levels of tennis across Canada. So they've been around for 131 years now. Yeah, so they're still around.
Great. And one person has asked, what would have existed where the gazebo is today?
Gazebo.
I could probably answer that a bit.
Hey,
Sorry. I was like, wow, I could probably answer that. So the gazebo is in Queens Royal Park. It's photographed right near the water. It is sort of still on the grounds of the lawn tennis grounds, but there are also bathing houses along King Street at the end there, right at the foot. So, I mean, you do have to take into consider erosion over the time, but there were bathing houses right near the water for any of the guests who did want to go swimming as well, because of course there was the beach along the waterfront as well there. So, but so, you know, it's sort of where the bathing houses would have started to become, you know, or access to the beach for guests, but also a bit of it was the grounds of the lawn bowling and tennis courts. So, okay, any other questions? I don't see anything else popping up. So thank you very much for that very interesting lecture. I think a lot of our visitors today online enjoyed that thoroughly. Again, to all of our listeners, if you want to support our lecture series, other programming, or our collections, you can make a donation through the link that I posted into our chat box there. We appreciate all the donations we have received from the series so far. This talk is our final one in this virtual series, so we thank you very much for joining us. And for any other presentations that we've done since January, you can find all of them on our YouTube. And stay tuned for more museum programming coming up later this year. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording here.